Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're doing a deep dive into a really significant government document. Our goal is to cut through all the legal language, the jargon, and get right to what it actually means. We are looking at Presidential Executive Order 14194, signed by President Donald J. Trump back on February 1st, 2025. And the title is pretty direct: Imposing Duties to Address the Situation at Our Southern Border. So the mission today: understand what this order says, why it was put out there, and what the impacts are both now and, well, potentially down the road. This touches everything from national security to maybe even the price of avocados.
Exactly. And just so everyone knows where this comes from, it was published in the Federal Register. That's the U.S. government's official daily publication for rules, notices, things like that. Presidential documents land there too. And just to be clear, for this deep dive, we are sticking strictly to the facts presented in this order, just laying out what it directs.
Right. So let's start with the why. Why did they issue this order? It kicks off by identifying what it calls the core problem. That's the sustained influx of illegal aliens.
And it doesn't just state the problem, it frames the consequences pretty starkly. The order says these issues are, and I'm quoting here, endangering lives and putting a severe strain on our healthcare system, public services, communities, and schools. So it's positioning this as, something directly affecting everyday American life. It sets a serious tone.
Yeah, definitely. And it uses a number to back that up, a statistic it highlights. It mentions that U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, recorded, get this, more than 3 times as many inadmissible encounters nationwide as during my first term. So, according to the order, a huge jump. It tries to quantify the scale right there.
And it links that number to sort of a broader societal worry. The text says, these challenges threaten the fabric of our society. It mentions gang members, smugglers, human traffickers, illicit drugs, saying they've poured across our borders and into our communities. It's painting a picture of, well, widespread danger.
Okay, so that's the overall crisis picture painted by the order. Then it really zooms in on one country's role: Mexico. It says very plainly that Mexico has played a central role in these challenges, including by failing to devote sufficient attention and resources to meaningfully stem the tide of unlawful migration and illicit drugs. Pretty direct statement.
Very direct. And it gets even more specific when it talks about Mexican drug trafficking organizations, DTOs. It calls them the world's leading traffickers of fentanyl, methamphetamine, cocaine, and other illicit drugs, and claims they cultivate, process, and distribute massive quantities of narcotics that fuel addiction and violence across the U.S.
Wow. Okay, so if these DTOs are supposedly that big, how does the order say they actually, move the drugs? What methods does it mention?
It describes pretty sophisticated networks, actually. It says they collaborate and conspire with transnational cartels and other global partners. Okay, and they use clandestine airstrips, maritime routes, tunnels, and overland corridors. Also mentions both willing and unwilling human couriers. So a whole range of methods.
Okay, now here's a part that really jumped out at me. The order makes a pretty explosive claim about the DTOs and the Mexican government itself.
It does. It talks about an intolerable alliance with the government of Mexico. That's the phrasing. And this alleged alliance, according to the EO, endangers the national security of the United States. It goes further, claiming Mexico's government has afforded safe havens for the cartels for manufacturing and transport. And then it links this directly to overdose deaths of hundreds of thousands of American victims. It also connects the cartels to human trafficking, saying they enable the illegal migration of millions, often tied to organized crime. And it throws in a mention of violent criminals originating from Central and South America coming through Mexico too.
So we've got the problems laid out, this focus on Mexico. But the core of this document is the National Emergency Declaration. How does this fit with, say, previous declarations? Is this different?
Good question. It actually does both. It declares and reiterates a national emergency. It specifically builds on one declared just a bit earlier, January 20th, 2025. But the key thing here is this order expands the scope of that emergency. It now explicitly includes the failure of Mexico to arrest, seize, detain, or otherwise intercept DTOs, other drug and human traffickers, criminals at large, and illicit drugs. And that failure is labeled an unusual and extraordinary threat to U.S. national security, foreign policy, and the economy. So it broadens the justification.
Okay, broadened justification, expanded emergency. So what's the actual action? What does the order do about it?
Right, the teeth of the order. It imposes duties, tariffs. Specifically, it says all articles that are products of Mexico shall be, consistent with law, subject to an additional 25% ad valorem rate of duty.
Ad valorem, just quickly for anyone listening, that just means it's a percentage of the value of the goods. So yeah, a 25% tax tacked onto the value of pretty much anything coming in from Mexico.
Exactly. And it's meant to kick in fast.
Yeah.
The effective date is set for 12:01 a.m. Eastern Time on February 4, 2025. So just a few days after the order was signed.
Are there any carve-outs? Anything exempt from this 25% hit?
There's a narrow one for stuff already literally on its way. Goods already loaded onto a ship or on their final truck or train before 12:01 a.m. February 1st. Those aren't subject to the additional duty, but the importer has to certify that. And importantly, these 25% duties are in addition to any other tariffs or fees that might already apply. It stacks on top. And they seem to have thought about ways businesses might try to get around it, like goods going into what are called foreign trade zones, FTZs. They still get hit. They have to be admitted as privileged foreign status, meaning the duty applies right when they enter the zone. Also, no drawback, meaning importers can't get a refund on these duties if they later export the goods. And even small, low-value shipments, what's usually called de minimis, aren't exempt if they're from Mexico. They're trying to make it pretty comprehensive.
What about retaliation? Does the order consider that Mexico might hit back with its own tariffs on U.S. goods?
It does, explicitly. It states that if Mexico retaliates with duties on U.S. exports or, similar measures, the president has the authority to increase or expand in scope these duties on Mexican goods, basically reserving the right.
Electronics, produce, building materials. For you listening, this isn't some abstract trade dispute. This could directly affect the prices you pay for lots of everyday things. It's using a big economic lever to try and force a change in border policy. Okay, so we know what the tariffs. But how does this actually get implemented? And crucially, how do these tariffs ever come off?
Right, the mechanics. The Secretary of Homeland Security is tasked with making the necessary changes to the official tariff list, the Harmonized Tariff Schedule, HTSUS, and publishing those changes. All government agencies are basically told, make this happen. It also sets up a formal consultation process. Homeland Security has to regularly talk with the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, and key White House advisors on national security and Homeland Security about the border situation.
Okay, so there's monitoring, but what's the off-ramp? How do these duties get lifted?
The order ties it directly to the president's judgment. It says, upon the president's determination of sufficient action to alleviate the crisis, the tariff SCOT will be removed. So it hinges on the president deciding that Mexico is taking sufficient cooperative actions to stop illegal migration and drugs. And there's a stick, too. If Mexico doesn't take adequate steps, Homeland Security and the others are supposed to recommend additional action if necessary.
So it's not just a one-and-done thing. It really sets this up as a kind of ongoing pressure point, right? With the ability to tighten the screws or ease off depending on how things are perceived to be going with Mexico's cooperation. So let's recap. We've walked through Executive Order 140194. We've seen the declaration of a national emergency at the border, the specific claims aimed at Mexico and the DTOs, and the major action taken. That's sweeping 25% ad valorem duty on basically all goods from Mexico. And we understand now that lifting these duties is tied directly to the president's assessment of Mexico's efforts to fix the problems outlined in the order.
Yeah, and it's a really stark example of how these incredibly complex border issues, migration, drugs, security, can translate into very concrete, very impactful economic policy. Things like tariffs affect trade, they affect supply chains, and as you said, they can definitely affect the prices consumers pay. It also really highlights the significant power the executive branch can wield when it declares a national emergency, and how that power can be used to shape foreign policy and trade.
Oh, why does this matter to you? Well, it's about understanding how government policy, the economy, and international relations all connect. This executive order is a really clear instance of using economic tools, pretty powerful ones, to tackle national security issues. It's definitely something worth watching to see how it plays out.
And it leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? How might this strategy using major tariffs as leverage for complex issues like migration and drug trafficking, how might that change the way countries interact on trade, on diplomacy, and on cross-border cooperation in the future? It certainly sets a precedent worth thinking about.